Hello to everyone. A warm welcome from Germany. This is your moderator, Daniel Blank, speaking. I would like to give you also a warm welcome on behalf of GIZ, who is implementing this webinar. We have been developing project together with our Mexican, Colombian, and Costa Rican counterparts on NDC Accounting. And today we are happy to share with you one of our main products, which is the NDC Accounting Tool. And I'm happy you've been able to join this webinar on this early Tuesday morning. And hopefully we can give you an overview of the tool, its functions, and its purpose within the next hour until 10 a.m. And I'm happy to receive your feedback and your questions throughout the webinar. Let me just first put you in the context. NDC accounting is a rather new requirement introduced by the Paris Agreement. As you might see on your opening screen, we have been developing in the project that started in 2014 a small guide on NDC accounting, and based on this NDC accounting guide, we developed the NDC Accounting Tool, which is an Excel-based accounting tool that translates and automizes many of the requirements and of the recommendations and of the decisions that have been written down in the NDC Accounting Guide into a tool. And all this is done with the idea to comply with the requirements set out in Article 4 and Article 4.13 of the Paris Agreement. And by doing so, we want to promote the institutionalization of NDC accounting, complying at the same time with the international requirements imposed by the Paris Agreement. Against this short international background, I would now like to present you shortly the project. I've prepared some slides. And as I've mentioned before, the project title is Accounting Rules for the Achievement of the Mitigation Targets of Non-Annex 1 countries. It's still, we still have the separation into non-Annex 1 and Annex 1 countries, although the Paris Agreement widely abandoned this separation. But as the project entered into implementation already in 2014. That means before the ratification of the Paris Agreement, we still have the separation. But what it's basically about is that all work we have been doing for the past 4 years is targeted basically at developing countries. And it means we have taken into account or tried to take into account the special circumstances of developing and emerging countries. So in this slide, you can see an interpretation of the United Nations organization and the environmental program in Mexico, UN environmental program in Mexico. And those organizations have tried to extract and to cut down the Paris Agreement into its basic elements. And as you can see, there's the 2-degree target, or the temperature limitation target of the Paris Agreement, and also the NDCs. As a second basic element, the mobilization of 100 billion of international climate finance. And also as a fourth element, the mechanisms for NDC accounting. And as a fifth element, the adaptation to climate change, as some adverse impacts of climate change are already that strong that we also need to adapt to climate change globally. So I like this this sketch quite a lot, because it narrows down the Paris Agreement into its basic elements, and it also emphasizes the importance of having such mechanisms that account for NDCs, for the achievement of the NDCs of all parties to the agreement, and also puts it on the same level as all other elements just cited before. So having in mind this importance of NDC accounting, I directly jump to the context of the project. As I said, with this general framework given by the Paris Agreement that requires the accounting for NDCs from all the parties. So there's no separation of non-Annex 1 parties, Annex 1 parties, or something of that kind. As I mentioned before, we've been collaborating in this project with Mexican, Colombian, and Costa Rican counterparts. The cooperation with several countries has been done on purpose, because we wanted to develop NDC accounting propositions, options, and a tool, and also finally a tool that fits not only the circumstances of a certain country, but of a wider range of countries. What we expected to achieve with the project is that counterparts implement an accounting system, and that this implemented accounting system also complies logically with the international requirements, meaning the requirements of the Paris Agreement and negotiations, ongoing negotiations. And these accounting systems are also supposed to promote the implementation of the NDCs by providing information on the achievement and on the progress of the achievement of the NDCs, or the targets expressed within the NDCs. And as a third major impact, we expect also to contribute to UNFCCC negotiations in terms of NDC accounting. And the areas in which we work basically are on NDC accounting, naturally, but also, and I think this is a part that cannot be overemphasized, because I think it's key for success and key for adoption of NDC accounting, to seek the linkages to the clarity, transparency, and understanding part of the Paris Agreement, and last but not least, to the enhanced transparency framework. The enhanced transparency framework is certainly wider than accounting, and covers a wider range of climate information, so to say, but still having an eye on how this information overlaps on how synergies of accounting and transparency information can be achieved has been a major area of investigation of our project. And in this sense, there's also the third area, the integration with existing MRV systems. MRV regulations, MRV guidelines have been in implementation for many years in developing countries, and as such, there has been existing structure and a lot of knowledge and institutional structure as well that we wanted to exploit and to benefit from designing or making propositions for the design of NDC accounting systems. And finally, also the fourth point has already been mentioned, the overlaps with the NDC implementation. So this is already enough. I hope you're already keen on getting to know the NDC accounting tool. If you have questions regarding any of our publications, regarding this presentation, you are free to get in touch with us, and here are the contact details. But with this short introduction to the project, I'd like to hand over to Ms. Reichbach, who will familiarize you shortly with the technical specificities of GoToWebinar. Thanks.
Yes, good day, good afternoon, and hello and welcome also from my side. Thank you, Daniel, for this good introduction and of the project. So my name is Ulla Reichberg, and I'm responsible for the technical organization and the support of this webinar. So welcome also to the participants from all over the world. Representatives from several countries are joining this webinar today. So what is the agenda today? After this welcome, I will give you a short introduction of this application and how to manage the tools. And then we have the presentation by Daniel Blank, followed by a question and answer session. And after the end of the webinar, we kindly ask you to complete a short survey, and please complete it. It is very helpful for us to receive your feedback. Let me now give you a brief introduction of this tool. So using the icon number 1, the small arrow, you can hide the control panel and bring it back to the front. And in this webinar, all attendees are muted, and you cannot unmute yourself unless the moderator activates the microphones. And only if this is the case, you can mute and unmute yourself by using the icon number 2. If we unmute your microphones and yourself, so please then follow the instructions of the moderators. If you want to view the webinar in full screen, please use the icon number 3. And in our question and answer session, we may ask you to raise hand if you want to speak and ask your question verbally. But in advance, you must let us know your question and should post it in the question box. If you want to raise your hand, then please use the icon number 4. We strongly recommend posting any question coming during this webinar in the question box. So just type it in and press the send button. Questions can only be seen by the moderators and by the organizers. So, and during the question and answer session, we will pick individual questions and discuss it or give more information to your question. So then we have a last icon. For language settings, use the icon number 5, the globe, which you can find on top of the control panel. And now I have a last announcement. This webinar will be recorded, and more information then can be found on the website of Partnership of Transparency. So I hope everything is fine with you now. I wish you a valuable and interesting webinar, and will now hand over back to Daniel. Daniel, the floor is again yours.
Thanks a lot, Ulla. Now you should be able to have a look at the tool. I hope you can see it already on the screen. This is how it looks like. The first question you might ask yourself is, why is it in Excel? Because they are definitely nicer looking tools. But our intention was to provide a tool and to create a tool that can be run on most on most government computers, and therefore we didn't want to use a license or software where you would have had to buy a license to achieve a license. And actually I think it worked quite out fine. However, in a tool there's always some references to the guide, and this is how it works. So the tool only provides very short explanations, short background information, and for getting a clearer picture, so to say, and understand the whole context, it's always recommended to read the guide, or at least the corresponding sections of the guide. And there's also one or two other publications that are referenced in the tool. But also it's only smaller text that we were able to include in this Excel tool. We hope that this smaller text also already give an idea of the basic concepts. And and as we said, the guide will, as I said, the guide provides further information and will also be made available to the public within the next few weeks, probably until next week. We currently have the translation free language versions in revision and in layout, and want to publish both the tool and the guide together within the next few weeks. So coming back to the tool, it provides on the top this basic structure. So there's the starting page, then you have a part where you can make all the settings, introduce your start year, your reference year, introduce your targets, and so forth. And respective to the target, you put it already here in the second section. You define what type of target it is. You also put the numbers of the target. You do that in reference to a base year or in reference to a baseline. And put then all the actual data on the progress on the emissions progress, or the progress in the in terms of the emission reductions. And at the end, you come to a section where you can have a look and you can assess directly the achievement of the NDC. And this is basically the accounting. It gives you an expression of in how far you've already achieved the mitigation targets of your NDC. Having said this, I've mentioned already some crucial parts without exposing them directly, which I want to do now. This target is only applicable to a specific type of NDC mitigation targets. It's only applicable to targets that are in reference to a base year, that are quantifiable in terms of tons of CO2 equivalents, and it's also only applicable to mitigation targets, as I said. And the structure is also repeated here, where you have a short instruction of the required user action, the data you have to fill, and just below there's also these limitations I've just explained, and there's actually one additional limitation, which is that thus far we haven't included ITMOs, the internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, as by Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And this is because not it wouldn't be important, but it is because the negotiations are still at a very early stage, I dare to say, and we don't yet really know to which area of the NDCs the ITMOs will be applicable, and how the transfer will happen, and if there will be certain mechanisms that would be applied to those transfers. And this is why we said we leave it out for the moment. Probably, and also assuming that integrating this specific part isn't that much of a complication. Yeah. And this is already the description which you can see on this intro tab, followed by some general explanations and navigate within the tool, that there are certain cells that cannot be edited, others that can be edited. So the yellow ones can be filled with data, the gray ones are just it's blocked cells that either show results or some automatic controls. So by clicking here on settings, we already jump to the next slide, or to the next sheet, and here you introduce your start year of the consideration period, also the base year of your NDC reference point or reference scenario, and you would also indicate from which date your last inventory, GHG, national inventory dates. Then just below you can specify your targets, and Sorry. And this is a part which requires a good lecture of the guide, because it's a rather complex topic, because most countries have submitted not only one target with the NDC, but several targets, being either unconditional and conditional targets, or being targets that have different scopes. And also, I mean, Mexico, for example, which is one of our counterparts, they have included black carbon as an additional climate pollutant, and have also a specific reduction target for this black carbon. So just in a nutshell, basically, or most countries, so to say, have not only one target but several targets, and combining the tracking of several targets isn't that straightforward as one might suppose from the beginning, because if we look then at the instruments we use to track the achievement of the targets, we don't have that many instruments, and we have to see if those either top-down or bottom-up instruments are really coherent with the targets. And this is something that needs good care. And depending on the selection of targets you make here, here in the example here in this example, we said we have a conditional and an unconditional target in reference to a baseline. The text in this part would give you some basic hints and some recommendations on how to use the tool and where to put your specific data. And yeah, so let me just, I can you see, if I unclick here, for example, this unconditional target, you see that the text adapts here, and if I select all, target types, then also the text adopted, and additionally there appeared this warning message, which says that in this case you would have to add this other gases to the sectoral breakdown list. But what is this breakdown list? This is actually something that comes here below, and is one of the measures that we included into the tool in terms of permitting a tracking that also helps, or is supposed to help to track the implementation of the NDC, apart from the mere requirement of NDC accounting. So this is something that I say goes more in the direction of transparency, because it would allow to include any sub NDC breakdown that is in line, for example, with the responsibilities for NDC implementation within your specific country. This is actually the information we took from the Colombian case. The Environmental Ministry of Colombia was kind to provide or to grant us the permission to share this this information with you. So this is for the Colombian case, and just to explain you, they said that the 8 line ministries have a responsibility for their corresponding sector to achieve also sub-NDC targets. They broke down the national NDC target into 8 sub-national, sectoral, ministerial targets, mitigation targets, and each ministry has to comply its corresponding sub-NDC target. And here we defined those targets, and just taking up again this other gases case, if you would have also other gases like black carbon that are not yet within the IPCC categories, GHGs, then you would add it here, and this is something I can shortly show. Going down here on the slide, but this is something you wouldn't have to search, but it's above in the description. The description would then say, please go down to the part where you introduce additional or alternate IPC categories, emission categories, alternative in terms of the categories provided by the IPCC, and you could then add here all categories where you have black carbon emissions. And so you would separate the tracking of the GHG emissions from the tracking of black carbon emissions. But this was just something that I wanted to explain shortly. The most important part for you to know is that you have here the option to break down your national NDC target into something that corresponds to the responsibilities of NDC implementation in your country. And you can include several sectors, or you could also, here it's ministries on a ministry level, on the level of line ministries, but you could also include any other breakdown. With this said, I would like to go to the next sheet, where you introduce already your first real data. And the structure of these sheet is that you introduce or can introduce baseline data. And here's just the hint that the baseline data would also have to be introduced on the same sectoral breakdown that you have defined in settings logically, and the same applies for the mitigation target. So if you have defined an unconditional and a conditional target, you would also have to include information on those levels. And here those tabs they are linked. So if you go then to the baseline button, we are linked directly to the specific section where we introduce in those yellow cells the baseline information. Here we decided for this Colombian case to include annual data. They have this this information for the baseline. Although also in the Colombian case, it's the target here is 2030. But but still, at least for transparency purposes, and also to know better as a country if you're on track for achieving your NDC target, they went for this annual tracking mode. And as I said, here's also this baseline information for this alternative sectoral breakdown of the NDC, and here actually those two sectoral levels are just compared, and you can see this is not something which I want to which I would like to forget to mention. If you apply such such an sub NDC level, you might definitely fall into the problem where a clear 100% alignment of both levels isn't feasible, isn't possible. In the Colombian case, we found that some emissions are not attributable to a certain ministry, either because they are not covered by a certain ministry, or because there are several ministries that would actually be responsible. And so there's some reminder, although you can also see that's a rather small number. But this is the kind of things that you have to have in mind. That there's the NDC accounting level, which is the most, or which should be the most robust and the most, and actually the level that is also reported to the United Nations Framework Convention. But again, for transparency and the purpose of facilitating the NDC implementation in the country, a breakdown as just shown before might still make a lot of sense. So just here below, you would also you can also get there by going to this target button. You put here then your targets. You can introduce them as percentage number or also as absolute numbers. If the percentage numbers are editable numbers or the absolute numbers, this depends on the selection you've made in settings. But generally this option exists, and it just facilitates the calculation. So you have the conditional target, you have the unconditional target. That's all the targets that have been chosen by the user in this example. And with this, we've already filled all the target data. We would then go to the next section, which is already on the progress, and just explaining you shortly what we've done, or what is our suggestion in terms of this progress tracking, the accounting, is that you could also compare here different instruments. Basically, there are two instruments. The first one is the one that is most common or that is common in all countries, and it's the national GHG inventory. The national GHG inventory might already be on the level you need it for your NDC. If you have economy-wide NDC, if you have another breakdown, maybe just sectoral NDC, you would introduce to the tool only the IPCC sectors that really that correspond to your NDC. But still, yeah, as I said, this instrument is available in all countries, and it's good data, and the top-down approach, and all this quality assurance and quality assurance measures and evaluations of uncertainties provides you a good overview about the quality of this instrument. But still, some countries might also want to have another form of tracking, especially if there are some if the implementation is through the implementation of the NDC is through some principal major measures, which means that there are not too many in number, so that the tracking in terms on the basis of these mitigation actions could be NAMAs, for example, is still feasible in terms of costs and in terms of structural problems like overlaps of information, also of project boundaries, of boundaries of mitigation actions. This could be a good alternative, and it also, using both instruments, would combine the best characteristics of each of the instruments. With this measure-based tracking, for example, you would also have an information on how your single actions that you implemented to achieve your NDCs perform, which worked fine, which didn't work that fine as expected, and you have information to judge what went wrong or what didn't go that well, and what actions really performed and achieved their respective targets. And as a third section, you have then a section that compares actually both instruments. The comparison is basically looking at how emissions through measures are introduced at the level of each IPCC category or each IPCC subcategory, and it verifies if you indicate or if you reduce maybe emissions at the IPCC category higher than the actual emissions of the category. So it's just some simple cross checks. But although they are simple, they might provide you some really important insights on where you have to improve either your inventory or the tracking of your mitigation actions. So here in the inventory-based tracking, you have a short overview of the aggregated emissions, and here below you put the data for the IPCC categories. These IPCC categories that are relevant for your countries, you can select them in the settings section, and then only those categories that are really relevant for your country would appear here. And depending on the degree of detail you wish to have, you would put either annual data or, for example, data for every 5 years, or the level you consider adequate, appropriate. And so this is for the inventory-based tracking. If you go then to the measure-based tracking, it becomes a bit more complicated, and this is something this is really important to acknowledge. This assignment here is also to the alternate sectoral resolution you've defined. And such an assignment is not always possible, or basically it will always be complicated, because you will have measures that mitigate in one sector but increase emissions in another sector. For example, in the if you switch from fossil fuel vehicles, conventional vehicles to electric vehicles, you would reduce emissions in the combustion of fossil fuels, but you would decrease those emissions, but you would increase emissions in terms of electricity generation, and yet you would already affect emissions of two different sectors. And we also have here the option to assign emissions to IPCC categories, and this is meant to improve over time the alignment between both instruments. And by doing this, you can improve the inventory data in the ideal case, and you can also improve the MOV data on the other hand, by doing this or by seeking this alignment between both instruments. But as you might know from standards like this Policy and Action Standard from the World Resources Institute, it's difficult to have a 100% accurate monitoring of different mitigation actions, because there might always be certain overlaps, or it might be too effortsome to monitor the impacts that are only at the 5th or 6th degree of emissions. But still, this is an important point that is also emphasized in the guide. If you have a clear idea of what is your accounting, which could be your inventory based, could be based on your inventory, you could still say, well, the exact number I calculated through my inventory, and this measure-based tracking, I just use it as a backup to have additional information on the performance of single actions. And although I don't use it for the NDC accounting purposes, it still provides me a lot of transparency, national or internal, domestic, and internationally. Yeah, and as long as you have this clear, some overlaps, I'd say, and also even maybe some double counting issues in this instrument are not that crucial anymore. Although I don't want to smallen this problem. It's definitely important to seek the best, the highest level of accuracy. But as I said, if it's clear what numbers reported to the UN in terms of the NDC accounting, or the progress in the NDC achievement, it's easier to combine both tools. Just to show you this part, also the comparison of both instruments. It's a simple solution. It just compares you then for all your IPCC categories, your inventory emissions, and the reductions from your policies and measures, and would indicate here your the percentage of coverage for each of the categories. And on the top left, you can indicate the alarm threshold. So if you would come close to 100%, for example, or be above a 100% of coverage, meaning that your reductions exceed the emissions of a certain IPCC subcategory, an alarm message would pop up then. So this is already the data on progress. And with this, we can have a look already on the reports, on the result of your accounting. Again, you have this inventory-based tracking, measure-based tracking, and the comparison. For the tracking, one instrument is generally enough, but you can apply the second one. As I said, it's an option. It would be a decision by the user if to apply, whether to apply the second tracking as well. And there are also some important information on the on how to interpret the information of each instrument, and these interpretations appear in the guide again. And here's some a summary, a short summary in the tool as well. So if you go here then to the first report, the inventory based, you have just for completeness your baseline data, your inventory data, and also the reduction for both or for all targets you set in the settings part. And here below, this is basically the actual result in achievement. It would tell you where you actually are. So if you have achieved 80% of your reduction target, of your conditional target in this case, or 80% of your unconditional target, this comes here in the lower rows. And the same applies to the other type, to the other instrument. So for targets, you would have the same information here. It's basically empty, because for this data I've shown you from Colombia, we haven't filled this data yet, so it's basically empty. And in this sense, also the comparison of this example, it's not very meaningful as by now in this example, but here you would then compare both results, and it would also tell you actually in how far your counterfactual baseline that can be deduced from your policy and action mitigation tracking explains the baseline you've created for your NDC. And yeah, I think this can also be a very helpful information because it actually compares your initial projections you've made when creating your NDC or formulating your NDC with the actual data that can be deduced from the policies and action monitoring. There's one last point that I want to point out. Also, it's a specific case. It's specific to having conditional and unconditional targets. If you have conditional and unconditional targets, you would have to apply both instruments, inventory-based and policy and action based tracking, because only by doing this you would be able to separate both targets, to have separate data for both targets, because the bottom at the top down, inventory based tracking doesn't allow you to separate the inventory always reflects all emissions of your country. And if the conditional and the unconditional target have the same scope, so if they are, for example, both on the economy-wide national level, the inventory wouldn't separate data for these two different targets. It would only be for the most ambitious target, the emissions, and so you need an additional information source which is provided by this measure-based tracking. But as this is a rather complex issue, and definitely complex to understand if it's not shown on a slide, I don't want to deepen this. You can have additional information provided also in terms of a graphic solution or graphic approach in a decision tree in the guide. But I just wanted to mention that there are also instances where it's actually necessary to apply both tracking instruments. With this, I already want to stop the presentation of the tool. I hope it was detailed enough to give you an impression of the options you have with the tool, how it works, and it was not too detailed enough to lose you through this presentation. And I would now like to open the floor for your questions and hand over to Ms. Reichberg again.
Thank you, Daniel, for this important presentation of this tool. It's a very interesting one. And now let me check if we have some questions here. Yes, I will now try to open the microphone for Laura. Laura has a question. And yes, Laura, can you ask your question? Is it possible?
Yes. So first of all, hello everyone. I'm from the Ministry of Environment here in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. And I do have a question for Daniel. I was wondering, for example, for Argentina's NDC, since we have an economy-wide target, I was wondering then, how can this tool be used in our case whenever we don't have, like Colombia, like a target for each sector? Can we still use a tool like this? Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Danielle, will you try to give an answer?
Thanks a lot, Laura, for this question. And first of all, I'd like to say that I'm really impressed that you got up that early in Argentina, just for joining this webinar. The tool is definitely also applicable to economy-wide targets. So it would be applicable to the Argentinian case as well. This sectoral breakdown of the national NDC target, as I said, it's you would only apply this if it helps you in terms of tracking the achievement or the implementation of the NDC. So yeah, the implementation of the NDC. So if you don't have those sectoral responsibilities, you might have also just the environmental ministry being responsible for ensuring the implementation of the NDC and yeah, doing the tracking of the progress of the achievement. Then this is no problem at all. However, we found that there might be many cases where you have subnational targets, where you have some major NAMAs, which was the case for Costa Rica, for example, where they have some where it's few NAMAs, but it's in comparison to the national emissions, it's huge, important NAMAs, and there it might be interesting to have a tracking on the basis of these NAMAs. So in addition to the tracking of the NDC, and combining or having the option to combine those two levels of information in one tool is just so helpful that we combine it. But for the Argentinian case, you would just leave all those breakdown levels empty, and the tool would still work for you, and you would still achieve the results in the achievement section.
Thank you, Daniel. We have another question. Let me open the microphone for Rocio. I hope it's working. Can you please ask your question? Rocio? Okay, it's not working. So Morocco is asking, so where is this tool available? So how can someone get it?
Thanks, Rocio, for this question. The tool has not yet been published, but what we would like to do is to share the tool with all participants. Share it together with not that small. It's actually a rather long questionnaire, but this questionnaire would allow to provide you some very important feedback on how complete you find it, on how comprehensive it is, and this kind of questions. And hopefully by next week we will be able to share it through email with all participants, and once having included then your feedback, hopefully within 1 to 2 months from now, it would also be available to make it publicly available. And this would also be then shared through Climate L, and basically, I think, provided on the website of the Transparency Partnership.
Thank you, Daniel. This was a question asking by several participants, so that was now very informative for all. So I have another one from Rio Audi. I will open your microphone and hope it's working. Can you ask your question, please?
Hello?
Yes, please, Rio, go ahead.
Okay. So, if I'm not mistaken, this tool is not yet published. But my question actually is this already working for subnational level? And if so, how subnational level can support the achievement in national level?
Daniel, was it possible for you to understand?
Yeah.
Could you? Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Rio. Yes, the tool is also applicable to the subnational level. You would, I mean, the tool is for NDC accounting. So I'd say that as long as you have the national level, it makes all sense to also include subnational levels. But there are some complications. It depends on how the subnational level is defined and on the quality of your data. So if you're talking, for example, about federal states or municipalities, you have to have in mind that there might be many overlaps in the data, in the emissions data. So an activity implemented in one region, for example, might affect emissions outside the region in another federal state, remaining with this example. And also there might be a situation where you don't have municipal GHG inventories, or where you don't have baseline data on this municipal level or subnational level. So, I mean, responding your question depends a lot on the availability of data, but as long as you have those data, and if there's really also a subnational responsibility in achieving certain subnational or sub-NDC targets, it makes total sense to apply this tool. And as we've shown, there are those options to break down the NDC in how far it really is applicable and feasible for your case. This would have to be evaluated for the specific case in more detail.
Okay, thank you. I hope this is fine for you. So, and I have another question coming from Kamal. I will open. No, it's not possible. Kamal, you have now. Okay, now the microphone is open. Can you please ask your question? Oh, it seems we don't have. We cannot hear you. Kamal, please post your question in the question box, and then we are able to read it. Thank you. So I don't have any further question now. Let us wait a second if Kamal is posting the question. Danielle, will you? There's one question. Will you publish this webinar and this record, and where? Just in case it is helpful in case of any further questions later coming up.
Mm-hmm. Sure. The audio recording of the webinar will also be published on this transparencypartnership.net homepage, and I'm confident that we will also be able to publish the guide I mentioned so many times throughout this webinar, together with the recording, and this definitely will also give you a better idea of how we've looked at this NDC accounting topic in the project together with our three counterparts.
Okay, thank you. So we did not receive any further questions. So as we understand, as you said, you will inform via the website when the tool is available, and then participants or interested people can download the tool, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. For the tool, it will still last a bit longer. We will share it first through your emails you've left with registration to this webinar.
Mm-hmm.
But the guide hopefully is next week, available by next week, and for you, in an extraordinary case, so to say, in a preferential case, we would share you the tool also, inviting your feedback, and the public version of the tool would then be available probably within 1 to 2 months from now.
Okay, thank you. So I cannot see any further question coming in. So I would say we can come to an end. If this is fine, do you have anything to add, Danielle? Or No, huh? Everything is said.
Everything is said, yeah. Thanks a
Perfect.
lot for your time and interest in our work. And hopefully it helped you. It helped you understand a bit better what NDC accounting is about and how it could be applied to and adjusted to national circumstances, because especially this last point to provide options to tailor it to national circumstances was always in the very interest of our work, and we are happy or I'm happy to keep in touch and wish you a good either day, evening, or night, wherever you might be.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you also from my side. And I want to remind you on the survey. When you leave the webinar, there will be a survey. So please answer these 3 questions. These are very important for us to receive your feedback on this webinar. So thank you and bye-bye.